which way? Do I have to stand a certain way?
There we go.
Right here in the middle. All right.
Shake it right.
All right, good evening, everyone. It is 6:30 p.m. and we are here at the Education and Wellness Committee meeting, Greenburgh Central
There we
School
go.
District. Here we go, we are ready.
Are there people on Zoom?
Oh wait, we're watching ourselves.
I know it's not.
All right, so I think we should be here. We are so excited about what we're going to learn. We are going to really learn about the data from the mid-assessment, and our assistant superintendent of curriculum will be going over this data. So anyone that has questions, please wait to the end. Let him get through the presentation, take notes. And any questions that he's not able to answer today, you can always email him and then he will get back to you. So at this time, we're going to have our assistant superintendent of curriculum and instruction, Dr. Macaluso. You are on.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Trustee Washington.
You're supposed to stand in the
No, plus these my podium.
Can everyone hear?
So,
Do you have participants waiting?
Did you check the weight room?
I don't.
There's nobody waiting, nobody,
Okay.
but it's streaming, so it's a good thing.
Okay.
so before we jump into the MOY data, looking at our reading and math performance from comparing DOY, I did want to go ahead and just remind the community that as of Friday on the GCUSD home webpage, the superintendent has posted the information for the Regents special appeal process. So could you just toggle over to the GCSD website for us?
Sure,
So
one
that
second.
folks can see what that looks like.
Let me share it.
You gotta break it, yep.
Hold on, I gotta share it so they can see it. One second.
Make sure they all know there's food here in Michigan University.
Yeah.
Exactly.
As we wait for the screen to share, we have a variety of snacks. We have cookies and we have crackers and cheese today.
Then we have the trail mix.
We have trail mix, we
Spicy and
have
sweet.
candies, we have, yes, it's sweet and savory. So
Mhm.
please, next time, just try to bear the weather and come through with the rain and pop open your umbrella and join us. We'd like to see you. So if you take a look on the GCSD website, under news and announcements, it's now the second announcement there on the left. So parents, you may click on that. If you could say for me, thank you. And so this just gives you some general information about that. Please do keep in mind that here at GCSD, we wanted to make sure that our students had every possible opportunity to score at the passing level on their own. So we did administer the January Regents to our students who needed to participate in that exam. And so now moving forward, we are at the point where students who have taken the Regents examination during June 2022, August 2022, January 23, we can neglect 23 June and August of 23 because we're actually not going to wait for that. In particular for our seniors who need to graduate. So if you, first of all, you must have passed the course. Okay, so that's the third item right there. And then you must have scored between 50 and 64 on the Regents examination in order to qualify for this appeal. And so under this part that says, what is the appeal process? I'm not going to have you click on that, but there is a form right there, all the way on the right, if you want to check, it doesn't make a difference. But that basically says that a student, parent, guardian, student's teacher, counselor, or the department chairperson may submit the appeal request to the principal. So parents and students, feel free to go ahead and submit that form if you believe that you qualify for that, and Mr. Smith and his team will go ahead and review that request. Okay, so before we look into the MOY data, just wanted to pause and see if there's any questions. Go ahead.
Is there a date? I can't see, because I got my glasses, but is there a date by which a parent must submit the form to the center?
There is no required date, but we want to make sure that we have those at least in. So the appeal must be heard within 10 days of the request, and so we want to make sure that those are done as soon as possible because we want to qualify students for graduation, so the sooner the better. And so I would say certainly within the next month or so, parents and students get that into us if there is anything, if you're requesting that appeal.
Are we going to send letters and or email, somehow contact the X amount of students that fell in that range and let them know, because they might not be checking the website or
That's certainly something we can speak to the,
with communication, there's a difference between push communication and pull, right? So right now we have it where parents have to pull that info. Is there a way to push that out?
we'll take a look at that. What's a nice way of making sure we push that out to our community? Any other thoughts, questions? So with that, we'll go ahead and we'll take a look at our MOY data from iReady. You ready? We'll just
That's
stop
the
there.
PowerPoint?
Yes, please.
Okay, one second. Share that. Let me present it first, then I'll share it. Show this. Then present. There we go.
Of course. Okay. Ooh, it's not intuitive. Okay, so keeping in mind that the purpose or one of the reasons why we use iReady is for us to identify which students need which specific interventions and which tiers of support. So again, just as a recap for our community and for our audience members, when we look at tier 1, those are considered students who are at grade level, and so they require the first level of instruction. Then we follow with a tier 2, which those are students who, if you take a look at the iReady coding, those are students who are 1 grade level below where they currently need to be, and so those students would receive tier 1 and tier 2 instruction. And then we take a look, the most intensive support is students who require tier 1, 2, and 3 support, and those are students who are either 2 or 3 or more grade levels below. So we'll start off with math. Taking a look first of all on national norms, this was in the pre-pandemic when we had the winter 18-19, where we looked at about 42% of students were typically at grade level. Okay. In New York, we are looking at 29% currently. 16 and now we are looking at Greenburgh, and our Greenburgh results are there at about 35%. Okay, for our students who are either on grade level or above grade level. You see similar trends with the yellow, where we are exceeding what has been the case before the pandemic, and then also matching the New York trend. And we are further reducing the amount of students or the percentage of students that are at that low level. Still not yet, if you look at the winter 18-19, we're still not yet at that level, where 8 and 8, we were at 16%, here we're still at 20, but still certainly exceeding what we saw in New York. Okay, so now we take a look at our fall to winter, and I'm certainly proud of what we've accomplished in the district so far mid-year. Okay, so taking a look at this, we reduced the percent of students who are at risk, or most at risk, needing tier 3 intervention, okay, down from 32% to 19% in math, and that's across the district. Tier 2, students needing tier 1 and tier 2 instruction shrunk from 50% down to 45%, and the percent of our students who appear to be on track to be at grade level by the end of the school year increased from 18% to 36%. So we wanted to take a little bit of a deeper dive. I know they can't necessarily see the last part because can we just move the?
They'll be able to see it. on the
We
screen.
won't be able
They
to,
can.
yeah.
You can, yeah,
So
I can move this, sure.
Yeah.
1 second. There you go.
Thank you.
Okay. So now if you take a look at it, you see the trends across our schools follow in a similar pattern. So at Highview, we reduced down that most at-risk population from 35% to 15%. And similarly, we increased the percent of students who are on target to be at grade level. Similar thing for Jackson. We went from 11% down to 5%, and then the green went up from 15 up to 34. Bailey, we're seeing a similar piece, and we're starting to see some of the trends that we have been looking at closely for the past 2 years, whereby as the grade levels increase, we see while we are still reducing the percent of students who are most at risk and increasing the students who are projected to be at grade level, we still have a chunk of our students as the grade levels increase in that red band. And that again speaks to what we have seen before with pandemic and students being on computer, right? So those students that would have been high, those are the students who were most likely to be in front of a computer for the past few years or so, receiving instruction on that modality. Okay. Just taking a look at our MOY data, specifically and not comparing it to the BOY, you certainly see where we have the growth over the kindergarten level, and that's something that we've seen more and more throughout, right? So we would not typically see kindergartners below grade level because they're just starting out their academic career. You also see the frequency over there of the students. Okay, and so moving down the piece, you see, again, while we are increasing the percent of students who are on or above grade level, we are looking at some additional supports in our middle school because we do tend to still see some of the students at that, right? You see we have the tail ends of it. We have 39% seventh grade projected to be on grade level, but then we also have 33% not. And so those are the grade levels where 7th and 8th, where we still kind of see where we have those two opposing poles where students are performing either well or not so well. We're starting to take a look at some additional data at a disaggregate level. Now we are taking a look at how we're performing by sex or by gender. And so here you see we pretty much comparable, except for the fact that males seem to be a little bit better off at being on or above grade level. And I mean, it's a note that we're looking at this year. That's not necessarily something that we are super concerned with at this time because it's our first stab at looking at this, our first poke at looking at this. And so we're going to continue to do some work with looking at maybe how students are accessing the curriculum, maybe it's like a matter of engagement in the classroom. And sometimes we just see in general, in particular for the math content area, there's just lots of research on that where females tend to be a little bit more hesitant to respond and to engage, but it's a note and it's a point. We're using this to overlay with our work that we're doing visiting classrooms through our with our walking process with all of our administrators. Now taking a look at our performance by race. Just pause a minute. And so what's interesting is that you can see our two largest populations, which are the white and the black race category. They're not extremely different from what other races are shown, right? And so Asian is definitely 59 versus 4, but you see the sample size is much, much smaller, it's 74 students. Whereas Black African American, we have 386 students, and then for the white, we have 475. Do keep in mind that Hispanic is not a designated race, right? It's an ethnicity, and so that's something that we continue to look at because Hispanic students can either be reported as white or they can be in a non-reported category. So it's an interesting.
They can also be the black.
They can,
Yeah.
they can, yep. Yes, they do. Or 2 or more, right? And we really can be anywhere represented. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the trends for reading. And you'll see similar kinds of things where we are close to approaching where we were at the national norms during winter 18-19, with about 47% students being at or above grade level. Here we're looking at 28 plus the 22. Okay, so we're at 52, so we're pretty actually exceeded that. And we've definitely shrunk down that below grade level, the 9 and 11% as compared to not only 18-19, but then also across New York State. How does it look when we compare ourselves from fall to winter? See a nice chunk of growth in that green band, which is what we saw in the previous slide. And comparably, you see the yellow shrinking and the red shrinking. And what this does substantiate for us as well is that our foundation and our base that we have here in the district in reading still seems to be moving on strongly, and we're seeing some nice gains with math as a result of some of the things that we put in place this year, particularly the Ready Math program, particularly Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions. So data is following what we would expect. And we see some similar kinds of things with school performance. So happy that we're seeing the greens increase. Again, Woodlands is increasing, albeit at a slower pace, but again, we have to keep in mind that those are the students who have had some difference or interruption in their academic career by being instructed in the computer or so on and so forth. And then you see that this reading data kind of confirms what we've seen for math, right? You see the 7th and 8th grade is almost nearly exactly as it was with math, where we have almost the polls at each side are fairly equal, with the exception of for reading, our green bars for 7th and 8th grade are much more. So everyone can see, not much larger, but definitely larger than what we saw for math, right? Here we had 39% at grade level in 7th grade and 35%, whereas in reading we are, here we go. And reading we are at the 49%, at 46 and 47%, right? So about 10% more students performing at grade level in 7th and 8th grade in reading. Okay, so things for us to think about. Interesting. I mean, could confirm some of those long-standing, I guess, perceptions that females are more prone to perform better in reading, not necessarily true, but certainly something for us to take a look at, right, and see. So, and there's a lot of questions that we were asking ourselves about this. You know, we've had some questions about reading full novels, how we can go ahead and enhance the curriculum that way. Certainly taking a look at males exposed to both fiction and nonfiction. So those are just questions that we're hearing as a result of looking at this data. Okay. And then you see some of those same similar trends that we saw with math, where our major population in the Black or African American category and the white category are fairly performing almost similarly. So gives us some thought about equity and access, how we give students an opportunity to engage with curriculum. And then we see some other small populations here and there, right? But again, very, very small, like 3 students, Native Hawaiian or the Pacific Islander, 100%. Does it help us with equity questions? I would say not necessarily, right? This one is the sample size is so small. So these are just some of the conversations that we continue to have in our PLCs with respect to performance. So this is actually one of the newer representations of data that we're looking at throughout the district. And so the way that this is organized is by performance and growth, and we continue to ask our partners that are ready to give us some more guidance on projected proficiency, because we know that's something that we want to see. So like, okay, students are performing at this level, what is their projected proficiency on the New York State ELA math exam? So we're taking a look at this plot, which is low performance, low growth on the left-hand quadrant, followed by high performance, low growth on the right. And then we have high growth, low performance at the top, and high performance, high growth. So what's interesting for us taking a look at this is you'll see that there are some pockets of grade levels where we have some really phenomenal things happening, right? So we saw that the 7th grade, we didn't necessarily have as many students performing at proficiency, but we see that the 7th grade overall is performing either in, right there, right in the middle. So they're kind of like, there's some hidden potential going on in there. There's some growth going on, but then the performance is kind of staggering. And we see that with the 6th grade, and we also see with the 8th grade, right? So you have those pockets of upper grades, right? The 6th, 7th, and 8th. This is supposed to point, but there you go. Right, and so they're kind of hovering in this area as well. But then we're also taking a look at what's going on with the lower grades, the K, the 1, the 3, the 4, where we're seeing low performance and low growth perhaps. You see our district median which is typical growth is about 67%. And then we have the district median from 21-22. So our district median growth has gone up from last year. But we're not necessarily seeing all of our grades in those top two quadrants. And so here's the same plot for reading. So I just want to go parallel back and forth because if you have an opportunity to look at these thoroughly as I scroll through, you'll see the same or similar grade levels in similar places on the map. We're running K1, 3, and 4. See similar kind of thing, K1, 3, still popping around in that same area. And then you see 7, 8 is still kind of popping around in that area, except that in 7th and 8th grade, they have shifted to the high performance, high growth quadrant. Similar with 6th grade, you see 6th grade right up there as well. So here's where we're starting to have conversations with our PLCs, especially again at that 6th, 7th, 8th grade level. And so, and so now what? So we are seeing our students grow, we're seeing them have some performance, and how are we going to push them to that next level? So some of the things that we started to do is look at ways that we can engage our learners in all grade levels, but particularly in those grade levels. I can't remember which arena that I had presented to that, but we started to talk about students taking more ownership of the learning and student-directed questions versus teacher-directed questioning and answering. So that we can start looking at that piece over there with the growth and the performance. And we do believe that that is a way that we can create some segue and some headway in that area and have our students continue to push up with the growth and the performance. Definitely a positive piece, and at the same time taking a look at what's happening in our lower grades so that we can start to push those students up to those levels. Right, you'll see again similar kind of things. So our district median did go up. Typical growth is about 76%, and we're about 70% through with the school year. Up from our district median last year, which was 69%. Things are moving along in the right direction. Carry it this way. So in both grades, we lose like what? It was 12%. The median went up. In that, we already had it a little bit higher, so it makes sense. And so that was our MOI BO.
Okay, so looking at these, I have another question. Looking at these charts, this is high performance, high growth from, what is the time period? Help me understand.
From the beginning of the year to the middle.
BOA, okay. So would this account for, we've discussed how, so this is growth, this isn't necessarily proficiency. So this might be some kids catching up from the last few years, and I'm curious, it'd be interesting to find out, because this is, sorry, I'm thinking through this through, these are overall grade pictures, which includes all student levels. It includes everybody who's getting extra help. I don't know what my question is, trying to digest the data.
I have lots of questions. So with our iReady, there's a couple of things. Just being around for a few years and talking about iReady. My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, you're supposed to be doing iReady every day for X amount of minutes, or X amount of minutes equal per week in order to truly do the iReady program. Is that still the case?
Are we talking about which component of it?
Personalized instruction.
Personalized instruction?
I'm glad you can answer that, because I have no idea, I'm just gonna say iReady. But I just, so you're talking to parents, so parents just do iReady. I don't know what the different components may be, but my child should be getting on iReady X amount of times per day.
Depending on the grade level, you know, some
Okay.
teachers give more, some teachers give less.
Mhm.
Some teachers use the individualized instruction in the classroom as some of those tier 2 and tier 3 interventions, mostly for tier 2.
So that might be a variable here to look at. Are those grade levels using that more or off, more or off? What percentage of those grade levels are in extra help? What percentage of those grade levels were, because of, as we come out of COVID, ready to make that big leap once we're in regular instruction? Sorry, still thinking this through, but,
So my question is, with,
You had a question on top
yeah, I didn't get to ask my question, so so if the kids are or are not doing iReady, how are we measuring that? And then does that factor into the growth or lack thereof in certain circumstances?
So right now, we allow the teachers to assign iReady based on their desired use of it.
Mhm.
There is no standard district, I guess, rule of thumb that they must use iReady for this many days or, I'm sorry, for this many minutes or so on and so forth. So it's something that we can definitely look into, but it is, like I said, sometimes teachers assign for home,
Okay,
for the home instruction, I'm sorry, the individualized instruction, sometimes they use it in school as part of a center.
okay, so can you, if you could find that out maybe and let us know, because as a parent, I understood iReady with Fidelity was X amount of minutes per week, I think it was. I don't think it was necessarily a day, but it was per week over X amount of time in order to truly have a child show growth. And so that's I guess what I'm trying to figure out. How do we?
Well, so for us, what's the balancing act is that, especially for reading, we have several tier 2 and tier 3 interventions. And then for math, we just started implementing Do the Math, which is another intervention. And so we're still fine tuning whether or not the intervention is the other intervention, or if the intervention is solely this, or if the intervention is this plus the other intervention. So those are the things that we're looking at, those are the questions that we're starting to ask ourselves in PLCs with respect to why we're seeing this kind of, right? So there can be a number of iterations.
Can I just add something? Oh, and also for iReady Math, since we have the core math program, there are 2 ways that students can use their iReady, either individualized learning, which is based on their diagnostic results, or teacher assigned lessons, which is based off the classroom content. So there are 2 pathways on iReady now in math, because we also have the classroom.
Okay, so I have more questions, but before hands up.
Well, I think, and maybe I'm misinterpreting your question, but I think kind of what's coming up for me is the growth potential based on the assessment scores or on like routine use of the program? So this is only from point A, beginning of year assessment, and point B, middle of year assessment. Okay, so part of, I guess, I don't know if that helps at all from what you were asking, because if it's not showing, it's not showing growth at multiple points, we're only looking at 2 data points.
Right now.
Right, that's right, yeah.
Okay.
No, my question is different. So my question, because I was here when I already came to the district and we were told that it was X amount of minutes per week for X amount of period of time. So that's what I'm trying to, where is that? So that's the part that I'm kind of.
So the way I heard your question, the way I heard your question is, in 7th, 4th, 8th, and 2nd grade, let's just use that as an example. Are those students
Right.
more likely to be assigned an individualized instruction as a routine, like every day you must go home and do 10 minutes of it? And then what I now hear as another follow-up question based on what Ms. Gillian is saying is, if you are in 2nd grade and you must do 10 minutes a day,
Right.
Is it individualized instruction that's based on my pathway that is pushed out from Ready based on my BOY? Or is it something that the teacher is assigning as a pathway? So those are the
So I'm
questions.
just gonna, because you were here and everyone was here, so iReady tells you how many minutes for the week with what they recommend for you to be successful, right? That comes from the company curriculum source.
Right, okay,
When iReady first came to Greenburgh, every school was charged to make sure that the minutes and the completion of lessons and the actual passing of lessons was happening. So that's something that was historical information. And just like Ms. Kelly, she stated, we were supposed to, there was training around how to use personalized instruction, how to use it in small groups, how to make it an intervention, and also how to use a teacher toolbox for an additional. And I already now has so many more components because you just went to a curriculum associates PD, so they just learned, like they just grew. From that point, it has grown into so much more. So as a district, now that Dr. Macaluso's here and he went to one of his first professional learnings, it is up to administration to make a policy what their expectations of high ready should be as a school district. So I think that's, where you're going, because that was the expectation.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying, that's where I'm still left on, like, if, Ms. Washington does it, or Trustee Washington does iReady for 20 minutes consistently.
Supposed to show more growth.
And then I'm doing it for 5 minutes this week, no minutes next week, 2 minutes the next week, 30 minutes next
While
week.
rushing through
Am
the
I-
diagnostics.
Am I gonna have a different, growth than?
So I want to address that piece. So one of the things that we're super on top of is rushing through the diagnostic and red flags. So that's something, and so we wanted to really focus on speaking of what you were mentioning, Trustee Washington, about going to the iReady symposium, is one of the things that we really wanted to focus on is making sure that we got good data. So that the growth was a real growth and not a student clicking away. So not to say that the question is a very valid question, it's a very useful question. In fact, I'm thinking to myself, maybe for end of year, we can take a look at sampling some of those students who are in some of those quadrants and actually take a look, because we can run the report, how did Chris spend 20 minutes a day on iReady? Did he spend 2 hours? Did he not spend any minutes at all? Because then that would help us with.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Right, and that's something that you guys can come up with as expectations for the next school year. What what you want your data points to look like, because, if we don't monitor, that it goes to the wayside, so.
That's
right.
So my daughter one of my daughters is in first grade. So when she was in kindergarten last year and she took the beginning of the year iReady, she bombed it because she was new in kindergarten, new at iReady, new at everything, and the teacher's like, don't worry about it. And we didn't really, but like that number is recorded as part of this data pool, right? So if you're also pulling from, so kindergarten, I feel like it's a very tricky number to look at specifically as a grade because they were all still so fresh at just sitting in front of a computer screen and not just clicking on everything. So I guess thinking about it in that way, and then kind of along those lines, what accommodations are made for kids who have IEPs, who are only Spanish speaking, because from my now first grader, like the number of kids in her class that not just their parents only speak Spanish, but the students themselves only speak Spanish. And are there accommodations made for the test to be in another language, or are they just being asked to answer questions that they can't read? Because that's going to skew all of your data.
So the reading is certainly English, right? Reading is reading. We are taking a look at some of the accommodations for our students with disabilities and for our language learners. I'm going to say that I don't believe that this is the one and only tool that, in fact, we don't rest our decisions solely on this for our students who are language learners and for our students with disabilities. First and foremost, because we have these other tiered supports that are not ready, that we're using.
Right. But if we're looking at like those bars originally that you had, the yellow, green, and red ones, that includes all of those kids, correct?
Correct.
So if you're seeing red for bars for certain populations, that doesn't mean that they understood what the question was.
Correct.
So that's not I feel like every piece of data needs an asterisk next to it, like, but that is not an issue.
That population, like, you know.
And so by ethnicity,
And
that's
so-
the issue.
And so we've actually, so for the next round of it, that's actually something that we've implemented for MOY to EOY is we've put some filters in the background that will allow us to pull out our students with disabilities and our students who are tag language learners so that we can further dig a little bit deeper with them to see how they're performing in comparison to other groups and other peer groups.
I do wanna add, iReady has taken of that feedback, not just from, our school districts, New York, the country, and they are pretty 90% sure going to release a Spanish version of the diagnostic test for next year. So they're working on that, because that is a concern for
Well, they
all
also
students
have-
or school districts that use this diagnostic tool.
They have the written Spanish, but you also have to look at the students, if there is an IEP or if anything else, what are their accommodations? So you go by their accommodations, and I don't know, as a school district, if we are pulling students out for separate, if we're going to that extreme, I don't know if you're taking the iReady diagnostic and you're supposed to be the test read to you. Are we going to that extent with this diagnostic? Should we go to that extent with the diagnostic so that our data can be a little bit cleaner? Is that something that you think about? And like you said, when they come out with the diagnostic, it only, because when you are taking the state test, either you are exempt from it or you're taking the English state test. So that is something the district has to determine how they want to administer.
And we've also put some other emphasis in the district with respect to students who are in different groups or in different populations. So one of the things that we've been working on a lot this year is our co-teaching model. So what does that look for students who are in a special ed classroom, and what does it look like for students who are in a classroom that has more of the language learners? Because that's a model that we use, and it's actually a well-researched model to have two teachers in Zoom at the same time. So those are the things that we'll look at as well moving along, and the other piece about looking at the accommodation, that's another point well taken for us to examine alongside with performance.
I have a couple other questions on this, but I get the feeling Ms. Gilman, you have something, so if that's, no, okay, good.
And-
Oh, I was gonna jump back.
No, I'm sorry,
She reminded me that she's a participant today, she is not a presenter, and
Oh,
she's
okay.
a
And I'll finish my theme here, I'm sorry.
I'm appreciative that she's come as well, so.
Okay, so I just wanna say, as far as using iReady with Fidelity, yes, but you may remember, there was parent pushback on that as well. The kids who, they got nothing out of it, so I don't want iReady to be the sole form, the sole choice when, right, I mean, some kids need it from the teacher, not from the program, so the fact that you guys are looking up is great, and I don't want to get to the pack point where we are requiring 10 minutes per day or 30 minutes per day or whatever it was. Unless appropriate for that child or that cohort. The other thing is, and that's also why I was a little bit nervous about having Ready Math come in the classroom, because I don't want to have our curriculum set up to have us show up well on our diagnostics, but you've assured me that Ready Math curriculum is aligned to NICE standards and to everything else, so. But if I may, go back to this screen, let's go back to the math one, if that's okay, to the grade level version of math. Yes, okay. So I'm curious, there was a debate, and there may still be a debate. We implemented algebra for all in 8th grade, which I do support. But I don't have a clear picture of if we have the scaling in place so that the students are ready for algebra. And unfortunately, we've had COVID interrupt us. So we can't really evaluate for algebra for all in 8th grade. So I just wanted, if you have any comments around.
So I guess it's okay.
And sorry, and is
Right,
the
right,
already
that's right.
diagnostic look at algebra for all, or is it eighth grade math, which is a little bit different?
Eighth grade math.
Eighth grade math.
It is-
So
it
maybe
is
that
eighth-
explains some of that grade level.
Yes.
It is definitely eighth grade math.
MGD.
So that has been a topic of some significant debate this year. Fundamentally, I agree with the concept as well, to allow students. However, we are seeing that there is a population of our students that are not ready for that.
Mhm.
And so we are continuing to try to find that fine line between, because the other part that we debate is pushing the academic rigor. And I think that that's something that we have heard throughout the district, and it's perfectly aligned with our IB for All initiative, where we want students to at least access some higher level IB course at the DP level, whether it be, pertaining to art, music, or a math course. But it's certainly something that is showing up in our data, and it's showing up as well with our students who are currently in geometry.
That's right.
So we have been debating a couple of different things at the middle high school programming level to help support that. In some cases, our students have a second dose of math, but they have a second dose of math from a different teacher. So we're trying to take a look at how we can streamline that for next year, whereby students who are most at risk can have the support of a, I hate to use the word, but it's like the old extension like lab, make a math lab, right? That's what we used to call it at the secondary level. But how we can go ahead and we can use our resources a little bit more in a different way for next year, so that the students who are most at risk can have that double dose.
So two questions then, or do we see a commonality of skills where the students are lacking? You know how that goes down to different, I don't know the terminology, but different.
Correct, yeah, you're right, so there's number of operations, there's number of operations, geometry, measurement.
Data. Algebraic functions, number of operations, measurement, and geometry.
So are there these honest conversations with the math department? Because I hear people say they support algebra for all, but if the math department is seeing holes or some lacking in one of those functional areas because everyone is forced to jump to algebra for all. So I agree with algebra for all, not just for like the high flyers, not honor students, but any of the students that want to do algebra for all. But if a student truly has some holes valid in certain areas, do we push them into algebra for all? They don't pass the regions, and then you say, okay, just go on to geometry, as opposed to actually kind of stopping and doing those fundamental, because math is cumulative. So whatever math you learn that you didn't do well in, you're gonna see in a year or two in another area. Like, so that's what I'm wondering, are there these honest conversations and collaboration with the department?
We have, and during PLC, we've been looking at cohorts of students and individual students and seeing where they were in 7th and 8th grade.
Right.
If they took algebra, geometry, what were their grades in algebra, and and also looking at the Regents data as well, not only their iReady data. So we have been looking student by student. We've been in conversations with building administration and to see what next year looks like for those students. So.
And if I may, those conversations, or Ms. Killen has mentioned it, but I think it's not as explicit as we would like to say, so I'll go ahead and say, we're even looking at what's the disparity between performance on the Regents and then a course grade, right? Because those two things should be Ms. Killen gives me a sheet, what did you say, that you could predict you should be able to predict the child's score on the Regents?
Oh, for myself, within 5%.
Within 5%, right? And so when you start seeing those gaps, where's the disconnect, for whatever reason, between classroom instruction, grading, course assignments, and then proficiency on this one terminal exam? Not that one terminal exam is the end all be all, but where is that?
So 3 questions and you can spend. 1, how long we have algebra for all? 2, can you go back over how it's affecting geometry? And I forgot the 3rd question. So did you want to say something?
Oh, I was just gonna say also, I think it's important to take into account that now we have a math program that's universal K-8, right? And then we're looking at programs 9 through 12 and we're using e-mathematics. So teachers are teaching the same content at the same pace, at the same level. And students, there's some similarities, right? And I think that when we use a curriculum and we have K-8, we're gonna see the strengths now moving through 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th grade. I think that's also important to recognize that we have universal curriculum now, right? We're using the same programs. Teachers, algebra teachers are using e-math. I think it's important to, teachers not just creating their own lessons, but they're using this common curriculum that we have implemented this year.
Similarly, on the elementary level, the question was posed about fidelity to the individualized instruction. What's also not necessarily reflected in this data is that we also have some teachers at the elementary level who are using IXL in addition to the Ready for supports. And so that could be influencing the data either which way, right? And so that's kind of that's where we are with respect to looking at the curriculum and picking out the things that are the most useful for our students, the most accessible. And we're also tempering that a lot with, I'm starting to hear more and more. Actually, I started hearing probably in October that teachers were like, you know what, we just want to tell the kids to put the computers away. And we just want to go back to teaching.
Have a balance.
Right, and so, there's lots of different pieces that are not necessarily reflected in that, which is why the dialogue is helpful, because it helps our community realize, what are the other pieces that we are juggling with and navigating, but it's something worth noting, as are the other questions.
So what's the effect of geometry? You had said.
So, yeah, I would just definitely say that students have some fundamental gaps in their skills at the geometry level. Ms. Gillen and I have regular conversations about how do we scaffold and support that.
And algebra for all, how long has it?
It's been
4 years.
It's
About 4
right.
years, okay.
And when I came here, it was already, when I came here 2 years ago, I thought it was at least in place for 1 year prior to coming.
Yes, that's.
So I estimated that 3 days.
So it hasn't shown data to show that it's successful. So algebra for all, is basically you come into 8th grade and everyone takes it.
Regardless of
But
where you are.
what's the data saying? So that's what I need to know, like, what's the data? What data are we using to measure? I'm not saying it's working, but what data are we using to measure that it is working or it's not working? So that's the question that needs to be presented, at the Educational Wellness Committee to say how you're going to, have some thought around it. And, because it was here for 4 years. It should say something.
I'm gonna say our guys were the first year.
Oh, okay.
So you guys have algebra for all?
You did struggle, I think.
Yeah, so I can only, and it's anecdotal, it's not real data, but I can tell you in the current 10th grader honors geometry, they are missing a whole segment. And I want to say I looked some New York State website that lists like what's covered in 8th grade math versus algebra. There's there's a whole section of something that's missing. And so we did talk about that came up, like parents, teacher, back to school night. So even the honors cohort is missing that and does struggle with whatever chunk from 8th grade math is not
It's 3
addressed.
geometric standards.
So you know what it is.
Yeah, it's
Wonderful.
it's 3 geometric standards, and the geometry teachers are instructing the kids on those standards prior to teaching the unit. So they are covering, they're just not covering any, they're covering in geometry. So they're making sure they have those foundation skills, but it is 3 geometric standards.
And you guys talked about the projected proficiency with iReady, because that's another report. What is it saying for our school? Like, where are we lining up?
They have nothing to provide us with the projected proficiency.
Because this is the first year of the next gen learning standard assessment test, so state tests, they don't have.
I get it.
The projected proficiency they have is from the old state tests,
Mhm.
the Common Core learning standards. So since they're new learning standards this year, they don't, this is the
They're not
first,
giving it to you?
this is the first grade taking the test, they don't have the data
We have
to
apps.
compare.
Okay.
Yeah,
So they're not giving us what they project, not that it has to be.
well, they don't even have the data to say if your child is on grade level, this is what the students last year received, because this is the first year with those learning standards. So there is no data for them to even project how it correlates to the diagnostic. They have it based on Common Core, I think probably one of the set last year, the Common Core standards, but not the new next year.
This is kind of a total jump in a different direction. So the very beginning, demographically, there was all of the pieces in not just male, female, but also racial demographics. So is there a particular reason why we don't ask ethnicity?
Oh, we do, it just didn't count on here.
But I've never seen data
Because then you
from
go,
iReady or ALP or anything that involves ethnicity.
What we do is,
beyond-
it's just that from a state perspective now, and rostering and all that stuff, so we probably know, like, so the same way you have the home access or whatever, that's the same portal that we pull things from. And you may no longer ask that as a race, you may no longer ask Hispanic as a race, you may select. I think depending on where you go, like sometimes they'll ask the first question, are you Hispanic or Latino? And then it says yes, no, and then, but you are forced to pick a race, and it is not one of the race categories anymore.
But why do we use this data then? Because I don't feel like it is accurate at all.
It's accurate.
Like so
we have
my
to, we
oldest-
have to, because.
No,
so you
but like
have-
my
if
oldest
a-
daughter
if a child
is-
identifies, right, so you.
right, but
if
the
someone
child's
says,
not
"I'm
identifying,
other,"
sometimes the parents are identifying.
Exactly, so that's their identity at that time until they're able to grow. So this is the identification data that we have as a district. That's up to a person to identify. Anyone here can identify as any race that they want to. It's who you identify.
Right, but if we're like you were specifically looking at Black and African American data compared to white data and using that
Right,
to make
it's what is
statements about
right, that's the part
inclusion,
that concerns me.
but if
Right.
if you're missing, like our, last time I checked, our population was 50% Hispanic.
That's not.
And if you're not delineating
Isn't it like a
that
40-30?
it's still pretty
Yeah, no,
high.
it's not.
So when you're looking at this, like, and I've talked to families who have gotten stuck on this and have all answered differently and have all felt that they don't know what to pick because they feel like if they pick white, it skews the data. If they pick Black, it skews the data. They don't feel like they have a place. And I'm not saying like you can't ask the race question. I'm saying, well, why don't we also ask, how do you identify ethnically? Like what are these, and even like the male, female ones, you're asking a binary question where people might not feel like they fit any of those things. And without a space, I'm not saying that you build a whole curriculum off of that demographic information, but if we're going to be inclusive and we're going to talk about those kinds of topics, we should at least ask the question, because you might start to see trends that you're not actually asking the information for. Like I didn't realize we didn't ask the gender question before. And that's interesting data, but I feel like we should take it, I don't know how customizable iReady is, if we can change the question, or add an option.
The challenge is, it's not necessarily how customizable iReady is, that, for lack of a better description, we roster all of these things through eSchool, right? And eSchool does not have that either, right? So every time, we, whatever, typing.com, and your child now has access to English student, what's the name again? Classroom, sorry, trying to remember how names from other places have been, right? So like, it automatically pulls from there. So in order for us to have that information, we need to create manual pieces for this and then somehow try to come up with, again, good data. Because as you said, people might either not know how to report or they might be hesitant to report because why are you asking this again when I already did it?
Yeah, that's possible too, but you have a big non-reported clump of people too.
But my thing
67
is-
students.
But I think what we have to, it really, first of all, who created race? So whoever created race put the systemic structure in place. And now when we're uncomfortable with the identification of it, when someone says, listen, you have 3 choices. That should have been a question that we should have fought a long time ago, but now we're here, and now we're saying, well, let's drill down to ethnicity. I'm not really, I hear you, I just don't know what the benefit of it, if you're saying, if I know that you're this ethnic group, how does that help my data?
How would we use this data now to
That's the
change anything in
question.
the classroom?
Right.
Because you wanna see if there are any disparities within the data and what access certain students do not have to certain curriculum. What is happening systemically, because we already know systemic racism is here.
Mhm.
So then what are we doing as a district? Because what happens, we'll internalize systemic racism and keep the same practices going. So if we don't look at demographic data, if we don't get uncomfortable, if we don't have the conversation, then we'll just keep doing the same thing.
No, I'm not disagreeing with any of that, I'm just saying, if we're trying to make
But I think that's what, you
decisions
have to go by
about
what the
inclusion,
state goes
we
by.
need to be inclusive.
And one of the things, so based on that, this is the work that happens again in PLCs, not necessarily happens, in this summarized quantitative data. But if we take a look at the reading data, it's almost exactly parallel for the non-reported, which is again, that's how we start to have conversations about this. So I'm not sitting here suggesting that there's no disparity between access for white students versus Black, but what I am saying is there seems to be a population, which is the 67 students for which there does seem to be disparity, and they seem to be the ones that are not reported. So that's where we start to have
Right,
those
but also
conversations.
if you were to go back to that
Hold on,
chart,
I'm confused at the fact that
Also,
down
if
is up
you
and
were-
up is down. Hold on,
if you were to,
hold on, I'm gonna show that.
what's the word? Disperse out within that white, how many of that white are white non-Hispanic and then white
Yeah.
Hispanic? That number may also move.
Correct.
And so to me, you're missing that population.
But that's still who they identify with. How do we
Absolutely,
go against what they
absolutely,
identify
but it would be interesting it depends on, again, what you're gonna do with the data.
Mm-hmm.
Are you gonna come back, not you, but is there gonna be a next year, oh, well, last year, this is how it was presenting, and this year, we decided to do this because of that, because if you do that, to me, you're missing that whole possible, and maybe the numbers would be the same, I don't
But I
know.
think because
But
this is
we
the
don't know, 'cause we
general,
don't see.
they're gonna drill down by class. And the teacher's gonna drill down by student.
Mhm.
So the teacher has more intimate data that really for this presentation, we don't need to have.
Mhm.
So they have to do the hard work, they have to, they're the boots on the ground, they have to go in there and really say who is not getting access. That's their job, this is just a presentation of all the data,
If you pop over, does it give the names of the kids?
not this
In
one.
these- in
Because
these-
it's all different reports.
Yeah, right, but you can't get
Right,
the
that's
names of
what you
each
get, you
child.
don't go deep.
Yep.
Right.
That's
we
when you
do-
start
we-
drilling
we
down
also-
and drilling down.
We have been going student by student,
In the
especially
PLC.
Right, exactly.
and data meetings. So we've had myself, and the literacy coach have had meetings with every single teacher, data meetings, and spoke about every single student, and every intervention they're receiving, classroom support.
And although this data doesn't drill like that, when you hover over it, you can really go deeper and look at the kids, say in green, in that non-reported area, and go back and even check how they identify themselves. That's how data meetings go, where they can get it, but they don't do it here, but teachers have that access.
Okay.
If we really wanted to extrapolate and pull out, well, who are the students in that band who say they are white non-Hispanic, and who are in that band who say they're white Hispanic? It's work, teachers can get it, I mean, it's just not like,
So one of the,
we can drill that deep and kind of get data on just what those children did in this report, I mean.
So one of the things that you would see, giving an illustration to what Dr. Iverson is saying, Kelly has let the teachers in the math area do virtual data walls and reading, still use old school conventional ones, which I love, but you will see, let's just say, Chris's reading card, and let's say my card was red at the beginning of the year, and now MOY, I'm at the yellow. So I would be moved over there, and if I'm a language learner, there's like a little flag or an indicator on that. And then you look at the same one for math, and you say, wait a minute, he grew from red to yellow in math, but not in reading. And you see some of those trends, and it could be it could be something that is, I don't want to use the word typical, but I will just for a point of illustration. It could be something that's a little bit more typical for a language learner, because math, even though it's become more and more involved with word problems, you can still pick out a picture, you can still pick out numbers and compute, versus reading where you have to look at all these different context clues and tone and setting and whatever. So those things happen, as Dr. Evans was mentioning
At the grade
at the
level,
grade
that
level.
means.
So that's precisely what I was going to say. I mean, more relevant data might be those cohorts of the English language learners who are the special ed, because then you can actually have a target audience to put resources into. And I'm gonna argue that you could look at free and reduced lunch. You know, what percentage is free and reduced lunch? You might not have nutrition at home, or might have parents who are working multiple jobs and don't have that, you know, the additional time or support at home. I mean, I might argue that might be more valuable data, because then we might have an idea of what other resources and supports we need to give them.
Yeah, I'm not against asking the question or having 75 demographic questions, but I think if we're going to make decisions based on data, we need to be looking at the correct data.
So it is on the agenda actually, and I'm just bringing us back to that. So I have a couple of food for thought items and or questions for the next. So I heard ask for, can I?
More questions on that.
No, I just wanna, before we go to that, I do wanna recap only because I was jotting down and listening. So I heard us talk about perhaps for the next session, taking a look at some of those students who are high growth, high performance, and what's the correlation between percentage of time that they spend on I-ready individualized instruction. There was a second one that I had in my head and I missed, so let me remember that, because then we jumped to algebra for all and presenting to the committee some of the possible impacts of that. So I remember number 2. Before algebra for all. There was also a request to take a look at the white category to see if we can further disaggregate versus white Hispanic, white non-Hispanic.
But it would also be any
Yeah,
of
that
them,
could be
because, yeah,
Right. We have to take a look at some of the background stuff, you know, I have to see, let me just say for all races.
yeah.
Can we check?
Not all races, there's only 3. Only 3 races. You're saying for ethnicities, they want ethnicities.
Right.
Yeah.
But we can,
It's gonna look under more than.
Everybody's not more races. This is it.
I guess what I'm saying is like,
More than
Educated.
right,
All
more than-
race.
right, in the non-reported, are they non-reported,
That's what I'm saying.
yeah, there you go. And then also taking a look at results by free and
Free and
reduced.
You said ENL, special education, free and reduced lunch.
And then
can
the
you-
second one was like, qualifiers for kids with IEPs and.
Yes,
Like-
special ed.
Oh, about
Oh,
testing
yeah.
accommodations.
And then can you also, I guess, when you go back to your PLCs, I think you put down how much like what time are they really given? Because my only concern, not what Chris was talking about, Trustee Valley, about everyone has to do it to the time, right? But if we're paying for already as a community, if we're paying for all aspects of already, then we should be using it. Because that's our money. So if it's 150 minutes, I'm making up time.
Right.
We're not going to say you better do 149.9 minutes, but we should see at least 80 minutes a week. And there's ways of students being able to access it in different ways, whether it's after school program, morning program, Saturday program, home, where it could be 10-minute blocks where they use it. But what Trustee Don was talking about, there are some students, is what happened before, it was very new. So now you can assign lessons to the grade level or above. So students that might be able, that are proficient, might need to be enriched. So then you'll use the enrichment component of I-Ready, just so they can get challenged, right? So it just, something as a district to say, what are we paying for? And what should we be using as a district?
If we go back to the next question, I also wrote down maybe for the next session, taking a look at performance by skill. So as we talked about, like geometry, numbers, sentence, operations, reading would be the same thing, vocabulary, phonics, phonemic awareness, and then there's a nonfiction component.
Comprehension, yeah. I think it's-
Comprehension is broken up into fiction. Trustee Valerie, you don't know.
We can go back to the ELA now, to the different grades.
Before you go to ELA, I have a really easy, quick question. So then, did I read correctly that 67% of 8th graders are not on math level? Was that correct?
Math.
Yeah, that's a state school, remember? Only one person.
Math,
In the middle of it?
no,
Is it this one?
math, we're looking at 47. 47?
47%.
47%?
47 is two or more.
So.
I'm saying 65% are not on grade.
So you're counting the yellow.
Oh, yeah.
By the middle of the year.
Mhm.
Sure.
And can people exempt, they can't exempt from iReady, so there's about 95 eighth graders.
Yeah, it's, we have about a, we have about 100, yeah.
Yeah, every grade.
Yeah, we
should be
don't,
100.
we don't opt in that.
Yeah.
I didn't think so, I just.
Yeah, no.
Is it-
Right, that's true.
Yeah.
So the same slide, but for our ELA, I believe there was a plateauing at sixth grade, and this, if I remember correctly, this is the year, sixth grade, I mean, we've discussed already briefly the novel reading, not novel reading, but this, you know, up until then.
Yeah, talk about that.
Yes, up until sixth grade, I believe the kids were reading constantly, had to track their reading, basically in a reading journal.
Yeah,
A lot.
That might drop away in fifth
Reading
grade or so, and you see, that's kind of when there's a plateauing. And I'm just wondering,
expectation.
again, are we taking them out of the habit that we so well built in our younger elementary grades by
That's a
not
good
having them read? I mean, even if it's just for pleasure, if they can continue
Right.
journaling their reading for pleasure on the side, just to.
Like a readathon or something fun. So that's a good question. I'm so glad like that. So your daughter's in what grade you said?
Mine, I have a first grader and a fourth grader.
Okay, so in fourth and third, second, third and fourth grade, are they reading novels or I know they're still doing guided reading and are they still doing Wilson, right? So they have those components. Are they reading novels with an S in those grades? Or is it just one like in sixth grade?
Yeah, that's right.
It's a good question. I'll take a look at it and give the final answer.
Because
I think it depends on the class, too.
believe in guided reading, and I definitely do believe in Foundations Wilson. But I also believe in challenging our students to, think a little bit more. Guided reading is great, but it's very guided. And you can have questions, but it's not really empowering their voices and making them think outside and how they can change the world. That's not really guided reading, that's not what they're about. So giving them a novel to empower them to say, to see what oppressive things are happening in the world and how can we change it. It has to do with, our IB. So putting a book in their hands, because I know that ALP students have, I think, 4 books.
Yeah,
Right,
so
they were
my
reading
fourth grader's an
before,
out, so I
and
can't really
I'm
answer
saying-
to not, and she also will read, like she'll miss her bus stop because she'll be reading.
Well,
So she's a bad person to use as an example,
Well,
because
that's a
she'll
good
read
thing, right.
But that's kind
constantly.
of what my main point is, though, at
Mhm.
fifth grade, the reading for pleasure stops.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's because the workload increases or because we no longer ask them to track it. So I feel like, then they're missing some vocabulary, they're missing some skills. It's not just providing them novels and guided reading, but encouraging that reading for pleasure, whether it's a comic book or Harry Potter for the fifth time or something that's even a little greater. It's that practice and.
And
So-
stamina, it helps with stamina. when
Exactly.
it's-
And
that transfers to
encouraging the love of reading.
assessment.
Yeah.
And encourage the
Yeah.
love of like book clubs and, just have, like I said, the readathons and.
We do it sporadically, but sorry.
It's not like-
It's not built in.
And it sets the
Exactly.
basis
Like,
also for research, right? When you have to look up something yourself, right? And go and open whether it's the book or the internet and look for things yourself, because you're an explorer, a reader.
Which is happening at RG Valley. I do know that there are a clump of kids, and I'm not sure why, that don't have library on their schedule. So they're not even in the library.
I think she had to teach something else, right, the librarian?
No, these kids just don't have it on their schedule.
Oh,
I don't know if they
have
get
it.
pulled out for other services or they do other things. I'm not sure why.
Mhm.
But there is a cohort of kids that don't have library as part of their
Well, that's
regular
good.
schedule. But you are all welcome and invited to come to our Journey Through Literacy events Thursday night at RG Valley from 5:30 to 8.
Yeah, we need an invitation, we don't know.
It's mainly for, it's out there.
Remember?
I'm the liaison.
Right.
It was all on that SEL programming flyer that went out months ago too, that has.
Oh, you
different
know, now you
ones.
have to bring it back to our agenda.
But anyway, so the PTA gave every student in the school a book, a bag, motivations for different things to read,
Yeah,
different
we
ways
could do
to
like summer
read.
reading.
All, but even like they got
Yeah,
to
like
pick
a
their
bingo
book,
card.
there's a bingo card of a choice sheet, so if you're not into reading, you can make a bookmark, like you can do art things, you can write poems. So all of their work is gonna be on display. And the whole point of it, to what you're saying, is to like remind them that reading is fun and that it doesn't have to be school-based, curriculum-based, like grade-based, like you can do it and explore reading in all these different ways.
Well, that's good. The PTA, I mean, is run by moms and parents, but I really would love to see our curriculum
Yeah,
I think
move it that way too.
we
you
did something
know,
last year.
as well.
Because
We gave away a
more.
book every
Yeah,
We'll do the same this year as well.
So maybe we'll do, maybe like having like a pep rally for the summer reading, make it fun for the kids. So they can kind of remember it, have memories, have the falcon run around and go all the schools and throw a book at them. Oh, boy. But I think that's true. So, and then I think the choice of books, is something also to look at.
So you guys are looking at the reading one novel in sixth grade
Absolutely.
issue? Because I know most board
We've already
members
put some-
are pretty concerned hearing that.
We've already put some pieces in place in there,
Okay.
that pushing some of the novels to the content areas. So I don't have a quick example off the top of my head, but let's just say they're reading about westward expansion, or they're learning about them in social studies, they would read something associated with that.
And then what I heard,
I can bring that's one of the.
and I'm not an educator, so I don't know the right terminology for it, but what I heard that I thought is even more helpful than just adding novels is the kids were coming together and discussing it in certain classes. And so then like, if you're a stronger reader and comprehension student and we're talking about it,
Right.
I can kind of pick up on things that maybe I missed. Or if I didn't read it, verbatim, because I'm not a strong reader and we're having a whole discussion, I'm getting it and maybe I become a little bit more interested in the story and I actually want to stay focused because we're having that discussion and I'm more of a discussion type of learner as opposed to like individual. When we come back into that class, so I don't know if that's being followed up the same way. But I did hear it sounds like the kids that were reading several novels
Right.
a year, they were
They
doing that
they-
process.
Right, a lot of different type of discussion protocols could be put in place for all students. And so they can have the opportunity, and it's really about just empowering their voices and letting them to be heard
Yeah.
as they're reading the novels. So I think it's really, a nice way of trying to get the novels in through social studies. But, my belief is ELA, not that, because you can read any subject, is like the home, like the hub of like the novels and the discussion. So I'm hoping that throughout the district, novels are there, because you said they're definitely in fourth grade.
well, my daughter's in Alp and they do like book tastings.
Well, you have.
And so it's a
outlets
different
totally different.
situation,
Right,
but
but
I don't
right.
know what happens in
Exactly.
other
So my
classes, but like,
thing
I
is-
don't see why that couldn't happen
So our
in
students should
all
probably have
classes.
more challenging, well, not more challenging, should have complex texts to
Right.
really challenge them, but all students should have the same amount of exposure.
But that same protocol and
Mhm.
process of individual on your own
Right.
reading it, coming back,
Yeah.
having that group reading plus the small groups. I don't know if
Right, and
it's-
still continue the guided reading.
Yeah, because I
Yeah, I know
you're
that's-
nodding, but I don't know, I'm wondering if, I guess Ms.
That's the kind of
Sandra
thing
isn't here to tell us.
They could
that.
come out of the PLC to the ELA
To
PLC
the-
umbrella,
right.
best
That's
practice
right.
that everybody.
That's right.
Well, and even
Do
if
it
you
their
see,
own.
it's still something that as a result of what was it, that was just this year, right?
Yeah.
Daily,
Yeah, it was, whatever.
I remember, it was like cold,
Yeah,
right? And it
I was like, one novel?
Right.
So the entire.
Right, and so we started to address it, not to say that we're not looking at doing it in ELA, but
Okay.
one of the quick fixes or the early wins that we.
Just to do it
Is
this.
to do it in the content areas, because one of the things that we wanna make sure that we're avoiding is not going back to old practices where reading a novel meant that teacher stood in front of the room all day or for the 40-minute block and read To Kill a Mockingbird out loud. Well,
But trustee Balance said though,
Children
was
have to.
really using that PLC, and you're supposed to have these PLC leaders now, right? So you're really are you guys using that PLC time model to get those techniques from the ALP program where they're shooting the kids up, really high to perform? a certain level of academic rigor, are they sharing that and are you encouraging that conversation as well?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And I, you know,
There was
I-
room for tweaking that even more, right?
And I, my push, maybe for over the summer and next year, is that we can find some professional development for our teachers, because we all need it, right? Everyone needs to be professionally developed. And I think just even in discussion protocols, in discussion prompts, how, and it shouldn't just be, you know, for the ALP students, but for all, and I'm not telling you to do that by September of next year. It's just a thought, like, I think teachers appreciate professional development. And I know the pandemic, everything was online, but it's always nice to be in a room with someone else and getting ideas with them. Whenever you come up with it, I just like to put that out there, whenever you decide.
And I also just say, we keep talking about novels, but I appreciate the fact that you're going through the other disciplines, because we all know that children are normally weak when it comes to nonfiction writing,
Yes.
nonfiction reading. So
And
I think we need to continue that, we don't need to dial back on that.
Right.
Um,
And that would have been some
so
good data.
I'm glad you're going through those other
The
disciplines.
TWR, the writing.
You know what, I mean, she just said, you know what, and it's so funny, I did have, when we originally had this scheduled for what was I think it was the 13th.
Yeah, but it could come.
We didn't have it at that point, and you know what, you're right, we just got the TWR data, I think, late last week, because I just provided the non-virus and so.
Okay, yeah, we can talk about that, yeah, and see how hopefully the writing program, and we can see on the state test how the writing program is supported.
You know, Dr. McLean, so I need to run, but thank you for the dialogue and trustee Washington.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much for coming back.
Thank you, everybody on.
I would say Ms. Kelly, but Ms.
Ms.
Gilliam
Gillen,
and
yes.
Dr. Iverson, thank you so much. I thought that was a very informative education and wellness. And next time we gotta talk a little bit about wellness.
Mhm.
We'll figure that, the SEL, maybe we'll bring that to the end, because we brought that up before. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Everyone, good night.
Nice.